The 30%, did they master it?
No,
They did not master
they
it,
don't know it.
right? So 70% mastered it,
That
but you have that
doesn't mean-
30% that didn't master it.
Right.
Well, if my child is in that 30%, I don't want you moving on.
Exactly.
I don't want you just saying, well, honey, the most of the class got it, so we good. No, Benjamin needs a small group, right? And so
Yes.
Benjamin is one of those 30% of the students that didn't do it. So that's why we're saying this would be identified as a small group. Most of your class got it, but there's still some kids that didn't. You think about it, that's also the reality of the ones you rocked. The ones you rocked are above 70. Even if it's at 90%, there's still 10% of your kids that didn't get it. We're not gonna leave them behind. Which one of those presidents said no child left behind? Okay, still a reality. We're not leaving them behind, right? We're still not gonna leave them behind. We're gonna give them the opportunities that they deserve by giving them a small group reteach, okay? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yes,
Just checking. Make sure y'all still with me. Okay. So far, we've identified the ones we rocked. We've talked about the maintenance plan for the ones we rocked. We've identified the ones that we would identify as whole group and small group based on below 50% and between 50 and 70%. Now, this next column says, what did scholars understand? We're talking about what did the scholars understand on the standards that they did not master. Because just because you didn't master a standard doesn't mean you didn't understand the whole standard. We know, especially, I'm sorry, I'm gonna take math. Okay, so math, for example, you're so shocked, I know. So, the standard could have 3 different things in it. You have to actually look at the student's test to see how they solved the problems, to see what their misconception was. Why did they miss this? Why didn't they understand this? What part of this didn't they get? Could be a comprehension problem. Could be a multiplication problem. Could be a 1-step, 2-step problem. They got the first step, but they didn't get the second step.
Just vocabulary.
Vocabulary, right. So it is, it's so many different ways, right, that it could be. So when analyzing incorrect responses for each standard, what do scholars understand about the concept, skill, and strategy? Another document that we have that will help you answer that question is your item analysis. When you look at your item analysis, this is actually one of my favorites. I mean, first of all, I like data a lot, but this is one of my favorite because I just happen to have a 4th grade one. But let's just look at any of your questions. This column, percent correct, shows you the percentage of the students that did get that standard correct. So this one I'm looking at particularly says that 36% of these students got question number 8 right. But then it tells you all the answer choices, and it tells you the percentage of students that chose each of those answer choices. So 40% of the students chose this specific answer choice. Why in the world did 40% of the students choose this specific answer choice and it's the wrong answer? Like, sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves as a teacher, like, maybe I didn't teach that, as clear as I could have, because evidently there was a misconception that tripped up 40% of my class. That's a lot of the kids to answer the same wrong answer. So what do I need to do as a teacher when I do reteach that standard? Definitely need to address that misconception. So the only way we know what that misconception is, again, is to look where?
In the test.
In the test. We need to look at the test, and we need to look at what is that answer choice and figure out why did they choose that answer. Most of the time you can figure out
Through
why
their
they chose
evidence,
through
that
their
whatever it is
evidence
they did.
why they chose it.
If they
okay?
did it.
And then you address that specific misconception. When you're teaching it whole group, when you're doing your reteach, you notice that was a major misconception on your students' assessments. So that's the misconception you're going to reteach. And guess what? We're almost there. The next one says, what did students understand? So just like it's something that they did understand, clearly there was something they didn't understand because they didn't master the standard or less than 50% mastered it, right? So we know that there is something about the standard that they did not understand, and you want to identify that. Once you identify what they did and did not understand, that's going to help you identify how to reteach it. Oftentimes we see the standard and we say, I know I need to reteach these, and then we just go reteach it. But we haven't really dug deep enough to see how we need to reteach it. But these last two boxes on the right help you to figure out what you need to reteach or how to reteach it. At the bottom, whole group reteaching plan. With your whole group reteaching plan, we're identifying the 3 standards that are most impactful to us. Once you identify those 3 standards, you're going to also identify the specific questions that were aligned to those 2 standards. You can find that either on the item analysis, or I stole somebody's test. Did I ever give it back? Was that yours, Ms. Dietrich, I had earlier?
I mean, I have my test.
So I gave it back, thanks. So that's this, you can find it here, because it tells you the questions that are aligned to the standard. That's one way. Or you can use the item analysis, which will tell you also which standards were aligned. So here we've identified the questions that were aligned to the standards that we have decided to reteach. Once we've identified those standards, then we talk about the misconceptions. Remember, what the scholars understand and what they don't understand, that's helping you to identify those misconceptions already. So you're going to put the misconceptions down for each standard. For this one in particular, it was a 4th grade decimal situation. So the issue was that the students knew how to add, they knew how to subtract whole numbers, but what they did have an issue, and they knew how to add and subtract decimals if it was a decimal to another decimal. But when it was a whole number and a decimal, they forgot to add the decimal to the end and then add the zeros to line up the decimals. So we know that that's the specific misconception that we're going to address when we reteach it.
That's an easy one.
That's an easy one, right? That's an easy one to find. And then so you're going to identify what is the misconception, and then now you know the misconception, how are you going to teach it? What is your objective for reteaching? And think about this. If you taught something and more than 50% of your class did not master it, you should more than likely be considering a different strategy.
Yes.
They didn't get the strategy that you taught. And maybe it is the fact that, well, I know I didn't teach it long enough. I know they just didn't have enough time with it. But who knows that? You do. I don't know that. I don't know how long, you know it. Okay? So you go ahead and set your objective. Your objective is very specific, just like your daily objectives are very specific. Your objective is very specific, and it's aligned to the misconception because you want to address that misconception. Then go ahead and decide, how are you going to assess mastery? I'm going to reteach it. How will I know that my students have mastered it? So you can either do an exit ticket, an individual practice, a quiz, a check-in, whatever it is you decide. Make sure you have a systematic approach of, how do I know my students have understand this concept now? And then your reteach approach, what format are you going to use? For me, in particular, I would recommend just doing a mini lesson. A quick I do, we do, you do. I mean, of course, your you do is the part that assesses your mastery. But like a quick, we're talking 10, 15 minutes max. Because remember, you're addressing just that specific misconception. So if you're only addressing a little piece, it's not going to take you long to address it. And if it does, then do another one, do it again the next day. But don't spend 30, 40 minutes on your reteach and then you don't teach your regular content that you're still responsible for teaching, your current concept. So that's your reteach approach. And then reteaching date and time. I would hate for you to do all this beautiful planning and then never do it. So if you write down when you're going to reteach it, you're more than likely to actually go ahead and reteach it, right? So go ahead and identify a date, I would say, and a time to go ahead and say, I'm going to reteach it on these 2 days at this time. That way you're holding yourself accountable to say, I'm going to reteach this. Plus, you're going to turn this document in by the way, I meant to tell y'all that. These documents, when we do turn them in,
that.
they'll be turned in to Ms. Trent because she's the formative assessment coordinator. And Ms. Trent will, in turn, disperse them to where they need to be. So if you're hard copy, you can do hard copy. If you're email, you can email it if you want to type. Either way,
So
as
you're
long
gonna
as,
Send us the.
yes, I'll tell you exactly where it is.
Must be-
So you're going to email that to her, get it to her. But then also, once you have done that, your appraiser is going to meet with you to discuss it. So that you have thought of these ideas. You might have additional questions that you want to ask your appraiser. You might want to have two or three heads together working on ideas of a reteach plan. But you planned it out. But then your appraiser, within a couple of days from you turning it in, or from the due date, because you might turn it in early, within a couple of days of the due date, your appraiser is going to meet with you to discuss it, and to see if there's any, what's the word, if you need any support
Any feedback.
from them or feedback, okay? And then the final piece is, what does your ongoing reinforcement look like? So it's kind of like a maintenance plan for your ones that you've retaught. Because now you've retaught it, you've assessed it, they're good, they finally got it, but making sure that you maintain it through your ongoing reinforcement of your do nows, your cumulative review, homework, and things like that. Kiss me.
All right, so I know without a doubt, my
Mhm.
biggest problem is word problems, as you
Okay.
know.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in every teak that comes out,
Mm-hmm.
and that gets confused with the teak itself.
Yes.
And that
So,
is-
how would I address that? I guess is the question.
So,
So I mean,
you-
there's one teak that kind of, I mean, there's the 1 and 2 set column teak.
Mhm.
I mean, but that's only one teak, and there's many different teaks that are tested through the column.
Yes, so every
Yeah.
TEEPS is
So-
tested through problem solving now, pretty much, most of them, right?
So would you basically, when I'm saying data reteaching, maybe a
So,
problem solving day every week that I just take separate from every? I mean, how? I mean,
so you're
I'm
doing
worried
your
about-
problem of the day. Are you doing a problem of the day every day?
Not every day. We're doing problem
Okay.
of the day twice a week.
So you should
Every
do
day.
problem of the day every day. Every day, because that's gonna address that issue. And then making sure that when you're doing your problem of the day, that they're drawing pictures, using strip diagrams to make sure that they're just drawing a picture of what they're just reading.
So you could focus one day on like the visuals of it,
Mhm.
when you read sentence by sentence, and then showing them how they can represent it effectively and efficiently, where they're not just doing little dots
Mhm,
everywhere,
mhm,
which takes forever. You can just focus maybe on that day. So the next day, you're like, remember to represent your visual. You may help them a
Maybe
little more.
every
and then
Monday,
you add another little step.
be more explicit.
Same
Yes, so,
problem.
so you're
And
like
then-
starting from very basic to like
Mhm.
building them. And then later on, as you progress through the weeks, they'll be able to do all those things on their own.
Mhm.
Because she
On
said earlier in one of our meetings, just, you have to start basic because
Yes.
you go in thinking they don't know anything.
They don't know
So
anything.
you have to start with the very basic.
Yeah. And
I
I
would do it
like this
every day.
idea, I even tell people, just because it's called a problem of the day doesn't mean you have to solve the whole problem in that
Exactly.
problem of the day time.
Mhm.
Break it up like she said. 2 or 3 days. Man, it can be a problem of the week. Like, because they're
They'll
digging
really
deeper
get
into
into
it, you know?
But it'll get
That's a
faster.
good idea.
It'll get faster
Mhm.
as you progress.
And so that's how you can address that. That's more like a,
I kind of like that idea.
yeah.
It is, because if you go quick through it, then you might lose them.
And it may not be, it
You
may
just-
be more like problem of the every other day.
Right, but, yeah.
you know.
Problem of the
But
every
you're
other day.
achieving something in each of your sessions. You're achieving one thing, then you're reinforcing it,
Yeah.
and then you're
Keep
adding
reinforcing
and
it.
adding and adding.
And
And you
keep with
start
that
again with the
vocabulary.
And I did make y'all a copy of the sample that I just walked through so that you can refer back to it when you're doing your own. Oh,
An
sorry. Oh.
exemplar.
An exemplar, thank you so much. I love your wording.
No, that-
Yes.
I think
I'm you
that's
can stop the
HISD's
video
wording.
anytime unless you just